we just got the first set of detailed leaked Canon EOS R1 specifications. Will it indeed have a 30 megapixel sensor? Can it shoot unlimited 40 frames per second, 120 frames per second, and 240 frames per second continuous burst? Will it have a stack sensor or a global shutter? And what about the video specifications? Will it have Canon Log 2 and Canon Log 3? Well, stick around after this short message for the first set of detailed leak specs. But first, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest camera news. And for all the minor news stories, all those news stories not quite big enough to have their own separate video, follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter. We finally have our first set of Canon EOS R1 leak specifications, but it's thanks to a Weibo post. So you might be wondering, how credible is the information? Or is the leak just someone's forecast? When I first saw that this was coming from Weibo, I had my reservations. In 4 years of covering cameras, I've only seen 1 or 2 things coming from Weibo that have proved to be correct, so I'm taking this with a huge grain of salt. But the reason why I'm reporting on it, the reason why I'm bringing you a video on this is because, well, they got to be the most plausible set of leak specifications that I've seen for the Canon EOS R1. If you take a look at the Canon EOS 1DX Mark III, and then you take a look at the Canon EOS R3, the specifications for this camera look quite plausible, they look realistic. But let's get right to the specifications, and then afterwards, I'll give you my, well, reality check where I reached out to my source from yesterday, and he gave me his thoughts on what this all means. So the Canon EOS R1 is supposed to have a resolution of 30 megapixels. You remember a couple of weeks ago when I had a poll and I suggested maybe 32 to 36 megapixels? I couldn't see it going under 30. Well, according to Weibo, it's going to be 30 megapixels and it's going to be a full frame stacked sensor, not a global shutter. So at least the resolution is higher than the 1DX Mark III and the Canon EOS R3. The Canon EOS R1, well, it can shoot 40 frames per second. And it can shoot 120 frames per second. Now, it doesn't mention if there's any sort of limitations on 120 frames per second, but it does say unlimited at 40 frames per second. And 240 bursts, well, I suspect that if this is all true, then we will have some sort of, well, limitation. I don't know if it's going to be 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, whatever it's going to be. I wouldn't be surprised to see some sort of limitation on 240 frames per second. There's also no mention that if 120 and 240 are at full resolution at 30 megapixels, or if it's similar to what the Nikon Z9 is doing and dropping that down to, well, lower resolutions. Wouldn't be surprised if this camera is capable of shooting at different, well, resolution modes. And like the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, this camera is going to have a 1 second pre-buffer shooting, something that we were hoping to get in the Canon EOS R5 big firmware update by the end of last year, which didn't happen. Now, in terms of artificial intelligence, the 1DX Mark III had deep learning and dramatically improved the autofocus capabilities of that camera. Well, I'm happy to report that the Canon EOS R1, at least according to Weibo, is going to use artificial intelligence for better subject and object tracking and performance. And as I posted 3 months ago, Japanese patent 2023 149423 provided us with a breakdown of how Canon intends to provide better object and subject tracking when the subject or object is in motion, whether it's moving in and out of frame or temporarily hidden by another subject, using its new predictive algorithm. So it looks like a lot of these patent filings that we discovered late last year appear to be, well, as I thought, appearing in the Canon EOS R1 to improve it over previous cameras like the R3, the R5, the R6 II, and the 1DX Mark III. Now, there's no mention on the type of image sensor that this camera is supposed to have, but don't be surprised if it has an all-new image processor. Like the Nikon Z9 and the Nikon Z8, the Canon EOS R1 is supposed to have an all-electronic shutter. And flash sync, 1/1250th of a second, so that's pretty good. And it has a lossy Canon RAW mode, so that's all good news. But what about the video specifications of the Canon EOS R1, at least according to Weibo? Well, Canon Rumors said that the Canon EOS R1 isn't going to have 8K video. They went on further to say that based on that, they don't believe it's going to have a resolution of 45 megapixels or higher. And this seems to back that up. Now, in terms of video, the Canon EOS R1 is going to be capable of shooting at 6.7K over sample 4K, 6.7K, and 4K video up to 120 frames per second. And that's definitely an improvement over the R3, the 1DX Mark III, but it's not a huge improvement of what's currently on the market. Now granted, with a stacked sensor, it should be able to provide more detailed video and be able to provide more dynamic range. And yes, the Canon EOS R1 does have better dynamic range than the Canon EOS R5, but it also has better dynamic range than the Canon EOS R3. So that's good news. That comes from the stacked sensor, but keep in mind this is a higher resolution version than the stacked sensor in the Canon EOS R3. So to have an improvement of at least half a stop, there must be some other technologies in play here to be able to provide better dynamic range than, of course, the Canon EOS R3. In terms of video shooting modes, you can shoot full frame APS-C with a 1.6 times crop. It can shoot both DCI and UHD 4K. But I was expecting it to push the frame rate in 4K, and that's the only sort of red flag here. Why not push the frame rate in this camera up to 150 or 180 frames per second? Because if you are shooting sports, there are those opportunities when you want to get a car coming or somebody doing sprinting or something. You want to shoot that sport in high resolution, high speed 4K video. And if it's detailed high resolution, full sensor readout providing you with much more detail, that can be very powerful. So that's the only thing here that has me kind of going, yeah, this seems a little bit off. Now in terms of log profiles, you're not going to be surprised to hear that this camera is capable of Canon Log 3. But it's also capable of Canon Log 2. No mention of Canon Log 1, just Canon Log 2 and Canon Log 3. And I did forget to mention this, in terms of RAW shooting, still shooting, it's capable of 12-bit RAW. So there we go there. Now it doesn't mention anything about dual card slots, but I'd be absolutely shocked if this camera doesn't have CF Express Type B, not Type C, Type B dual card slots. There won't be a Type C and a Type B. They're not going to do anything like that. It doesn't make any sense. Now, in terms of the ergonomics, it's going to be, well, a little bit heavier than the R3, and it's going to be improved in terms of the ergonomics and the heat management. And what else have I left out? I'm sure I've missed something here because there's an awful lot of information here. So we talked about the electronic shutter. So yeah, new Canon RAW shooting, a lossless Canon RAW shooting. Okay, here we go. I forgot to mention this, and this is surprising. It supports a 16-bit GGO RAW in photo shooting. So there we go. Maybe the 12-bit shooting was another option in stills, or maybe it was an option in video, because after all, this is taken from Weibo, so it's translated from Chinese, and it's most likely translated using machine translation. So now let's do a bit of a reality check here, because we've heard many things over the last couple of days. Canon rumors said no 8K video and likely a resolution less than 45 megapixels. Then Sony Alpha rumors came out with a piece saying that the Canon EOS R1 is going to be insanely capable. And then my source yesterday also said that, yeah, it's going to be beyond insanely capable. And, well, when I look at these specifications, if somebody said this is what Canon released, this is the R1, these are the specs, I'd look at it and go like, yeah, okay, this is plausible. Based on what we see in the 1DX Mark III and the Canon R3, it's plausible. It's not insanely capable. It's not blowing my mind, and I hate these terms, but it doesn't completely exceed my expectations of what we could see in this camera. So I reached out to my source from yesterday and I said, look, these look completely plausible, but based on your discussions with the Camera Insider, what's your feeling here? And we had a conversation, a good 20-minute conversation, and he said to me, he said, you know, when I look at these, this doesn't seem to match up with the conversation we had and how absolutely excited this person was over this camera, and that this was truly going to be very, very capable, that anybody looking at the specs. Remember the Canon EOS R5? When we got those leaked specs back in January the 27th of 2020, everybody who looked at those specs said like, wow, these are incredible. And then people said one of two things. I'm getting this camera, I can't wait, but I wonder what the price is. And then other people said, there's no way, this doesn't make any business sense, this is completely nuts, this is crazy, there's no way Canon leapfrogged the competition. These specifications coming from Weibo, they're not validated, they're not coming from known sources. So what I would do here is, while they do seem completely plausible, take this as your new baseline for the Canon EOS R1, but don't make any purchasing decisions. Let's just wait and see, because I'm pretty sure that this video, along with other information coming out over the last few days, is really going to help shake that rumor tree. My gut feeling here is that these aren't overly exciting, and these don't match up with what my sources told me and what Sony Alpha Rumors has said, but it does match up with what Canon Rumors is saying. So we should know very soon. In terms of the release date, we are expecting, from what I've gathered from various sources, is that the Canon EOS R1 will get a development announcement leading up to CP+, which is next month, and then the camera will start shipping probably sometime April, May, and we'll have a full-blown announcement sometime after CP+, most likely in March. So yeah, very interesting. I wasn't sure if I was going to do a video like this, but I just knew based on these specifications that people were going to jump all over them, and I wanted to provide you with just a little bit of context. And I'm getting all excited, I'm getting out of breath here because, you know, I'm passionate about cameras. I love this stuff, and this is something I do for fun, and I really do want to see the latest leaked specifications. I can't wait for the announcement, but what I'm seeing here right now, while it seems plausible, I'm not completely convinced. There is one more piece of information that I found surprising. Around 30% of you watching right now are subscribed to this channel, but 60% aren't. Please do me a favor, go ahead and subscribe. It really does help this channel grow. And one other thing that really helps this channel grow is if you're looking at buying new camera gear, such as the R3, which is $1,000 off, the Canon EOS R5, $500 off. These are new price floors, a permanent $500 off the R5, a permanent $1,000 off the R3. And if you're looking at purchasing camera gear from B&H, Adorama, or Amazon.com, please consider using my affiliate links in the description down below. These ones right here, because I get anywhere from 2 to 12% back, and that really helps this channel. It helps fund new purchases. And I'm going to let you in on a little bit of what's going on inside my head here. If these are the leaked specifications for the Canon EOS R1, as an ordinary filmmaker, as somebody that shoots video most of the time, I'll probably hold off and not get this camera, instead get the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and have it be my second camera. And the money savings that I get from not buying the R1, you know where I'm going to spend that money, right? I'm going to spend it on other lenses, and I might even pick up the Canon EOS R7, because when shooting with the 200 to 800 millimeter or the 100 to 500 millimeter, having an R7 shooting full sensor readout with a 60% crop or a 1.6 times crop is really going to help me in terms of wildlife, and I can just leave that 2 times extender at home and then maybe pick up a 1.4 times extender. So there's an awful lot planned, but we are expecting a whole lot more to come out shortly. I've already had, I think, 2 videos come out today already, because things are starting to happen. And this is what we start to see as we move into January, then February and March. So much information is going to come out. And right now it's just Canon making the news. We're going to get more news from Sony and from Nikon. And there's lots of, oh, and of course that Sigma announcement that's supposed to be happening in the first week, in the first early days of February. It's a big Sigma announcement. So Canon Rumors was correct. We are getting a big Sigma announcement. The only question is, and I really didn't kind of focus on this in the video, the only question, are you ready for this? The only question I have is, just because it's a big Sigma announcement, does that mean they're going to announce development plans for the Canon RF mount? Will it be full open, that they've been given permission by Canon to produce whatever focal lengths and apertures they want on the RF mount? Or is it going to be about unique new lenses that they promised for a long time? Is it going to be about lenses for other systems? And the reason why I say this is, if you recall back in 2021, Panasonic promised that they would announce, they would talk about the GH6 by the end of the year. And then in the fourth quarter, we had a scheduled event. They didn't talk about the GH6, and people were upset because they had promised by the end of the year. And then a few days later, they had another scheduled event, and they didn't talk about the GH6. People were upset. We've been teased, we've been led along. And then at CES, they talked about a camera that wouldn't be named, and they were referring to the GH6. Then sure enough, I think it was a week or 2 before CP+, they finally announced the GH6. So that's why I don't want to get too carried away with these announcements. Whenever I've got something to talk about, I'll always tell you how credible I think the information is and what we can expect. And in terms of going back to the R1, take this with a grain of salt. It's unvalidated, untrusted, from untrusted sources. So while plausible, it doesn't seem to fit that insanely capable designation set by Sony Alpha Rumors and my source from yesterday. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great day, and we'll see you again soon.